Chapter 8 of D99 by H.B. Fyfe. This LibriVox recording is in public domain.
The room would have been nearly a cube except for the fact that hardly any parallel lines appeared in its design. The corners were rounded and the ceiling slightly arched. The floor, though much of it was obscured by a plentiful supply of cushions, was obviously several inches higher in the center than where it curved up to meet the walls. All surfaces were the color of old ivory, but seemed to be of a more porous material. The cushions could have been cut from slabs of some foamy, resilient substance that had been manufactured in several other dull colors. On two of the larger cushions placed end to end lay a blond man, long and lean. He wore a dark gray coverall that was loose as if he had lost weight. His features had a poor color, a golden tan with something unhealthy underlying it. He was, however, clean and recently shaven, and his hair was cut short, if somewhat raggedly. He stirred, then blinked into the soft light of an elliptical fixture recessed into the ceiling. With a smothered groan, he came completely awake, very carefully, as if from long habit of avoiding painful movement. He rolled to his left side and braced one hand against the floor. The effort of sitting up made him bare his clenched teeth. The grimace was fleeting. He seemed to have some purpose that drove him on to roll completely off the makeshift bed until he knelt with both knees and his left hand on smooth floor. As he paused to rest, he held his right hand close to his body. After a moment, he brought his right foot up opposite his left knee. Another rest period, on hand, knee, and foot. It was required before he shoved himself away from the floor and slowly stood upright. The ceiling suddenly looked too low. He was tall, perhaps 2 inches over 6 feet. His features were regular, without being especially handsome. A man sizing him up might have expected him to weigh about 190 pounds. But slight hollows in his cheeks suggested this would not be true at the moment. His eyes were blue, but the lids drooped, and he seemed to focus only vaguely upon his surroundings. At length, the man turned and walked deliberately to the side of the room where a doorless opening offered egress into what looked like a corridor. The opening was in the shape of an ellipse about 5 feet high and 3 feet wide, beginning a few inches above the floor. He bent to thrust his head into the wall, peering in both directions, but taking no heed of faint, scurrying sounds out there. Satisfied, he walked back to his bed, turned over a cushion with his toe, and kicked a small utility bag of gray plastic out into the open. The man stared at the bag for some minutes before reaching an evidently unwelcome decision. Laboriously, then, he knelt until he could slide one end under a knee and slide open the zipper with his left hand. He pawed out a few items: battery shaver, towel, deck of cards, toothbrush, which he left scattered on the floor as soon as he located the object of his search. This was a many-jointed mechanism of metal that resembled an armored centipede. It was as long as his hand and nearly as broad. He held it in his palm, as if wondering what to do with it. Some slow process of judgment having blossomed in his mind, he turned over the subject to press a small stud. The plates of the belly parted. From a recess there, he fumbled out a miniature accessory that fitted easily in the palm of his hand. This was round, about 1 inch thick, and might have been made of black plastic. The man's lips twitched in a tired smile as he hefted it pensively. Without moving from his kneeling position, he thumbed a nearly concealed switch on the edge of the disc. Within seconds, the thing began to put forth music, a diminutive reproduction of the sound of a full orchestra. The man gradually raised his hand until he held the little player to his ear. His expression remained uncomprehending. He lowered his hand, shrugging slightly, and turned off the music. Once more he forced himself laboriously to his feet, leaving his other belongings on the floor without a backward glance. He strode to the door with the pace of a man who has just walked 5 or 10 miles. His long legs carried him across the distance in only a few steps, but there was a slowness, a heaviness, in their motion that revealed a deep weariness. He raised one foot just high enough to step through the opening into the corridor. Outside, he turned left and walked along at the same pace, passing several other doors at irregular intervals. That they may have led to other rooms with other occupants seemed to interest him not at all. He neither glanced aside nor paused until he came face to face with a barrier, a wall blocking his path. It was the first doorway that sported a door, and the latter was closed. It looked to be made of a plastic substance, darker than the ivory walls among which he had thus far moved, but smoother. There was a grilled opening, more or less centered, but no other markings. Nevertheless, the blond man seemed to know where the portal would be fastened. He ran the tips of his fingers along one curved side, as if judging a distance. Juggling the black disc in his hand until the grip suited him better, He pressed a second switch, which was concealed at the center of the object. A thin jet of flame, so white that it far outshone the lighting of the corridor, flared against the edge of the door. He moved the flame along the edge for about 2 feet. Then he snapped it out and waited with his eyes blinking painfully. The corridor lighting had been revealed to be yellow and dim. Having rested, the man took a deep breath and shoved with his left shoulder against the elliptical door. It slipped off whatever had been holding it at the opposite edge and fell into the hallway beyond the bulkhead. He had neatly cut through 2 hinges on the other side. Without looking back, he stepped over the loose door and continued on his way. Eventually he came to another such barrier, and he dealt with it in the same fashion. The third time he was halted, he found himself at a vertical column, which passed down through an oval opening in the ceiling and disappeared through another in the floor of the corridor. The man hesitated. A vague sadness flitted across his features. Then, as if driven by some deep purpose, he approached the column, in the most regular shape he had encountered anywhere. The surface of it was ringed by horizontal grooves nearly an inch deep, and looked as if it would be easy to climb. From the hole below, there rose slightly warmer air, bearing a blend of pungent and musty odors. The man's nostrils wrinkled. He stepped to the edge of the opening, then sidled around until he had the greatest possible space on his side of the column. The instrument in his hand finally came to his attention as he reached out to touch the grooved surface. He considered it for a long moment. Apparently he was pleased at the brilliance of the thought that eventually moved him to thrust the thing into a pocket of his pants. He faced the column again, and again hesitated. His right hand lifted an inch, indecisively, following which a snarl of pain twisted his lips. Sidling around the opening once more until he found himself having completed a circuit, he let the fingers of his left hand explore the grooves. It did not seem to occur to him to look either down or up, although faint distant sounds were borne to him on the current of odoriferous air. In the end, he leaned forward until his left shoulder came against the slim column. He wrapped his left arm about it. A little scrambling, and he had gripped it between his legs. Then a slight relaxation of his hold permitted him to slide gradually downward until he slipped past the floor line. There were only a few inches to spare between his shoulders and the edge of the opening, as if the latter had not been designed for such as he. The next level into which he descended was dark. He continued to slide cautiously downward. At the second level below his starting point, there was light. The corridor resembled that in which he had begun his journey. He put out one foot to catch the edge of the opening while he rested. This hallway curved not far from the man in one direction, although the other side ran straight for about 20 feet before being closed off by a door similar to the one he had removed. Around the bend floated faint noises, suggesting high-pitched conversation, although they came from too far away to reveal the nature of their origin. The tall man kept one eye cocked warily in that direction. After a few minutes, certain sounds seemed to draw nearer. The chittering talk faded, but he could hear more plainly a hushed scuffling that could have been caused by many feet taking short, hurried steps. The man released his foothold and slid smoothly below the floor level just as moving shadows appeared at the bend of the corridor. He dropped down the column through 4 more unlighted levels, reaching an atmosphere that held a blend of machine oil along with its other odors. Light filtered upward with the air currents. Somewhere below was a very bright level, whence came the rhythmic throb of heavy machinery. This did not resemble the sounds of a spaceship, nor yet a Terran factory, but some considerable work was being carried on. He was on a level so dim that he touched the edge of the floor opening with his toe to make sure of its location before moving off along the corridor. In the darkness, he went more slowly than before, but made better time than looked possible. Under the circumstances, he reassured himself by stretching out his left hand every few seconds to touch the smooth wall. He walked normally, though not noisily, and his sense of direction was extraordinarily good. About 100 yards along a corridor that seemed not to have a single bend or corner, he slowed his pace doubtfully. A few steps more brought him to another closed door. This one, however, yielded to his shove, swinging back to reveal a stretch of tunnel with a bare minimum of illumination oozing from widely spaced ceiling fixtures. Here he could sense side doorways his fingers had usually missed along the darker stretch. He had gone another 100 yards and finally passed 2 cross corridors, before he was again obliged to stop and rest. He slumped against the side wall, favoring his right arm and gazing dully before him. A few steps further along was one of the typical elliptical doorways. Through this one, some light was reflected to the wall of the corridor. The man stared at it in the way anyone in the dark will turn his eye to light. After several minutes, He moved toward it as if impelled by idle curiosity. Reaching the opening, he hesitated. A strange expression flickered over his face. The decision to look or not to look was causing him great uneasiness. Finally, he stepped forward and entered a small chamber. This was evidently located so as to house another slim column that disappeared upward and downward into unknown levels. Several small oval windows were set just below the ceiling, at a height which presented no particular difficulty to the man when he stepped over to look through them. The scene that met his eye was a wide corridor, so wide that it might be termed a concourse or even a public square. Members of the public that were to be observed frequenting it were very, very far from being human. Two of them scurried past his window, clearly illuminated by lights far up in the domed ceiling. They were furry, about 5 feet tall, lithe and cat-like in their movements. Compared to a human, they were slim and short-bodied. They possessed 3 arms and 3 legs, each set being equally spaced about their bodies. Now and then, as they walked with short, rapid steps, frequent joints were apparent in all limbs, showing clearly that they were not just muscular tentacles. From the openings at the apexes of their heads, which must have been mouths, they were streamlined in a fashion that made it more natural to picture them swimming like Terran cuttlefish than climbing up and down thick poles. The 3 eyes set about each head were low enough to allow for jaw muscles. The man watched this pair slide down a column set beside the wall that concealed him. Other individuals were scattered about the wide concourse. Almost without exception, they wore nothing more than a pouch, secured by a belt just above what would have been the hips in a human. Clothing was made unnecessary by handsome coats of short, honey-colored fur that enhanced their feline air. Sometimes, when one or another bent or twisted, purple skin would show through the fur. Across the concourse, the man could see the open stalls that suggested shops. Most of them were dark inside, with netting stretched across the fronts. The general atmosphere was not unlike that of a small Terran business section, or even a spaceport terminal, late in the evening with business slack and only night workers about. Abruptly, those abroad scuttled for the walls. A perfectly good reason for the exodus appeared a moment later, as a column of low, long vehicles dashed from a high arched tunnel and shot across the open space. Each was 3-wheeled and carried half a dozen individuals wearing what resembled thick plastic armor. Cages of metal guarded their heads, and they bore weapons like Terran rocket launchers. The convoy passed out of sight before the man could note more. He retreated thoughtfully from the window. At the opening to the corridor, he paused indecisively. He shook his head, as if trying to put out of his mind what he had just witnessed. It might have been prudent for anyone in his position to give the corridor a searching look before entering, but this did not seem to occur to him. In seconds, he was striding along in the former direction, if anything, a trifle more briskly. As he walked, the muffled sounds from the scene he had examined faded in the distance. Once again he was alone, with his own discreet footfalls. Several times he passed junctions of cross corridors, and once he had to burn open a door. But never did he meet an inhabitant of the hive-like city. Either the way had been shrewdly chosen, or it was seldom used at this period of the day. Even granting both, his luck must have been fantastic. The corridor had begun to assume an almost hypnotic monotony when it ended bluntly at a column leading only upward. The man perforce was faced with the challenge of climbing it, a prospect which he obviously did not relish. Sighing, he reversed his earlier procedure in sliding down other poles. With only one good arm, pulling himself up was slow work. It was, perhaps, only the fact that the levels were constructed to suit beings 5 feet tall that made it possible for him to make it to the next level up. He sat with his legs dangling through the opening, panting, while perspiration oozed out to bead his forehead. This time, he was nearly half an hour in recovering, and working up the determination required to go on. The corridor in which he found himself ran at right angles to the one below. It was wider and higher, as if more traveled, but any such open area as he had peeped at was far to the rear. Nearby, however, was a much larger door than he had yet encountered. He walked over to it. When a tentative push produced no results, he dipped his left hand into a pocket for the black disc. He seemed to have a good idea where to locate the hinges on this door, too. When he had burned through, the door was harder to shove aside because it turned out to be of double thickness. The hinges had been concealed from both inside and outside. The tall man now found himself only a few steps from another such portal in what looked like an anteroom. Methodically, he proceeded to burn his way through, squinting in the bright light of the flame, but otherwise betraying no emotion. The last door fell away. Fresh air billowed in around him, and he could see stars in a night sky outside. Without haste, he stepped outside. The tan plastery wall reared above him for about 10 levels. Off to his left, shadows on the ground showed a jagged shape, so it was probable that another part of the building towered upward after a setback. The ground around the exit was perfectly level and bare of any vegetation. The nearest life was a wall of shrub-like trees about 100 feet away, and toward these the man began to walk in the same tired pace. He found, as if by instinct, a broad, well-kept path through the trees. A mild breeze caused the long, hanging leaves to rustle. Without looking back, the man followed the path up a gentle slope and over the curve of the hill. At the bottom of the downgrade, 2 figures shrank suddenly back into the shadows. He kept walking. "That you, Gerson?" came a loud whisper, as the 2 Terrans stepped forward again. "Come on, we have an air car over here. Did anyone follow you?" The tall man turned to go with them through a fringe of trees. It seemed like a poor time to try to talk, with the possibility of pursuit behind them. The 2 bundled him into the black shape of the air car in silence, and moved it cautiously through the trees just above the ground. They raised into the clear air only when they had put half a mile between them and the towering hive city.
End of Chapter 8.